Me Charles Show. So today on the upgrade series, I'm going to go over rate of fire and how to upgrade your Tippmann M4 Carbine and go about maybe tweaking it to shoot a bit faster in rounds per second or rounds per minute. I'm going to go over it and show you the trigger assembly and the buffer tube assembly and show you some tricks that might get your rate of fire up. There are other kits out there like the rate of fire kit, but this is kind of like my attempt at it and bring some of my paintball knowledge into the airsoft world and kind of showing you really the theory behind it and why it should work. Okay, so let's go ahead and remove the trigger assembly and the buffer tube and show you how to basically get down to that. So you want to pop out the lower receiver pin. I'm going to try to do this one-handed if I can do it like a boss. And then you want to pop out your selector switch, put that to the side, and then your trigger assembly should come just out like that. And then your buffer tube will come out just like this. And then you pull it out. It's so simple, the system here. It's as a mechanical system. There's no solenoid to control airflow, so there's no electronic device to control airflow. It's a full mechanical airflow gun. The only thing close to a solenoid, it's not even a solenoid, is down here, which is like a poppet kind of style for the full auto, but it's straight up like a spring connected to an air hose. That's all it really is, and it's pretty simple and it's just a pleasure to work on. Okay, so step one is after you get the gun disassembled somewhat, you want to disassemble the trigger box. So you basically just pop this piece off, comes off very easily, and then in here you have your trigger itself, and this can come out. Just watch the spring. Now, you can, like, I've tapped this and tried to put in a screw that you can adjust the trigger height, but really it's as far as it can be from factory. Like, you don't want to like pull it further down or like adjust this to pull it further down. It will just not fire properly. I tried it, just as a heads up. Okay, so this is the trigger assembly. This is like the poppet valve. It's similar to a poppet where after the single shot is fired, air travels down this hose. This is not the stock hose I'll talk about in a bit, but it travels down the whole hose from the top pin here and then travels through these banjo fittings into this poppet, and basically, if I can get this out, this pops back and forth, hitting the trigger, resetting it each time. Hint, that's basically why it's called a poppet. Now, a lot of people, to make sure that their rate of fire works properly, they shim this so that there is no play in the trigger box. You can do that with like adding any material here, so it sits snugly inside this box. But I'll do that in a different video. So there's two rules when kind of trying to achieve a higher rate of fire with mechanical moving guns. First of all, there is bottlenecks. So from the tank, going up a hose, through the gun, through all the air system, you don't want to bottleneck your rate of fire, or it's just going to chug along waiting for that air supply to come along. So one way of achieving that is getting a bigger macroline to your from your rate of fire to your actual poppet. So just in comparison, this is the stock macroline, and this is basically the new one I have installed. And this I got off an old Ion kit. You can get macroline off the internet. Maybe I'll put a link down below where you can get some of this stuff. But basically you just remove this, slide this on, and you want to take a Dremel and basically Dremel this out, or file it. You can just Dremel it out with an attachment so that it sits nice and flush inside the box, and just clip that on to your fittings, onto your banjo fittings, and that should give this puppy a bit more air behind it, and making sure that it has enough to reset itself without having to wait for more air to come down the line. So that's basically one step in achieving a higher rate of fire, and you'll see that in the rate of fire kits out there. You can simply do this yourself or buy that. Another thing is with the buffer tube. The buffer tube, all it does really is, besides give you that good, realism feedback of recoil into your arm, is the only function that this actually has is resetting the trigger. Like, all it needs to do is push the trigger back, and that can be done with a less, a much less heavier spring than this. So another way of achieving rate of fire is by making the distance that this has to travel less, because if you imagine traveling from here to here and then back again, is quite a distance compared to if you move it up a quarter or even halfway, where it can cycle quickly, compared to cycle a lot longer in the stock configuration. So a way of achieving another high rate of fire is shimming the spring and adding on these kind of shims that I've just found lying around my place. You can add washers, or you can buy the brass tube, cut it yourself, find a fitting that will fit this, and just literally take a hacksaw and shim the spring. That's another way of achieving high rate of fire. So this is my way. I just add shims to the spring, and that's way it has a shorter way of traveling back and forth, and that way you can achieve a higher rate of fire with resetting your trigger and then pushing your trigger with a bigger macroline. So yeah, I'll show you how to shim the buffer tube now. Okay, so with the buffer tube, you want to take your Allen key, stick it down this bad boy, grab this end with your hand, and loosen the assembly. Now I am grabbing the spring so that it doesn't pop off and fly across the room. And you'll know when that happens. And you just remove the upper and the lower. And down here is where I add my shims. So you basically start stacking shims onto this receiver to gain a lower or shorter distance between basically resetting the trigger. And that's part of the rate of fire kit, is tightening the spring, having it sit up higher. So that's basically how you achieve greater rate of fire with the buffer tube. So now that you have your buffer tube assembled again, you can go ahead and assemble your trigger box and basically pop the spring back in for the trigger, pop the trigger back onto the assembly, pop in the spring, make sure that you have feedback, and then clip on the top case, and it's that simple. Like, it's such an awesome thing to work on. It's so simple. There's nothing to it. If it breaks, like, I just clean it. It should work again. Like, really, it's that simple. It's really awesome. Anyways, what you're looking for when putting this back together after tweaking it is, when putting it back into the actual receiver, is that it just slides in nice and easy. If you have to like push down on this really hard, then you have to start filing down your indentation for your macroline, making sure that it fits right in nice and snug. But after you have that filed down properly, you can insert the buffer tube into the assembly. You should remove the valve when doing that, just so you don't bump it. But I'm going to go ahead and do that. Put in the buffer tube, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so now I have the buffer tube. I just put that in, and I replaced the pin here for the macro line. And I replaced the pin here for the. So I just replaced the buffer tube spring and replaced the HPA nozzle. Just a tip with this is the O-ring sometimes doesn't seal 100% even with silicone oil, especially with CO2, but even with HPA I've noticed that. But if you put a little bit of white lithium grease on it, it works to thicken up your O-ring and make that seal happen, and you won't have that really slow hissing leak in your assembly when playing. Sometimes I know when just popping the macro line, the odd chance is it does leak a tiny bit, just as a heads up. So we pop in the trigger assembly, pop in the selector switch, and then we can close the housing. How you want to shim this is basically you want to pull back the charging handle and go until you can't pull it back and cock the weapon, and then basically take some shims off and just get it to that point of right where you can actually charge the handle properly. After that, you can go ahead and start testing the rate of fire and doing your 1/8 or 16th turns on your rate of fire fitting. Okay, well I have it gassed up and cocked back. Let's see how the rate of fire is. Yeah, that's a lot higher already. So now that you have it pretty much shimmed and tuned to your liking, you can go ahead and adjust your rate of fire pin and get it to the liking of what you want. So that's how I achieved my rate of fire, and really it was the shit I had lying around my place. It's really simple, and I don't know why Tippmann didn't do it stock, but everyone has first generations and it can all be improved.